Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Jennifer Garvey Berger. Jennifer is Chief Cultivating Officer and founder of Cultivating Leadership, a consultancy that serves executive teams in the private, nonprofit, and government sectors. Her clients include Google, Microsoft, Novartis, Wikipedia, and Oxfam International. She's the author of or co-author of 6 books, and today we will speak about her latest book, Unleash Your Complexity Genius, Growing Your Inner Capacity to Lead. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
I'm so full of questions, but the thing that I'm just raving about is that you are right now in the south of France, enjoying probably beautiful weather. And I'm just so curious about how you got there. But before we even start with that, can you tell us a little bit about your background? How is it that you became an expert in leadership, and what drove you to write so many books about that subject?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started my career as a teacher, and then I got really interested in how schools change and how teachers change. And I went back and got my doctorate in basically this question of how do we change and grow over time, adult development, and particularly the facet is how do we become better able to handle complexity. And this is a completely interesting topic. For me, 20 years ago, I was captivated, 25 years ago now. And it was very fringe. Like nobody cared about how adults grow better able to handle complexity for many years. But lately, with so much complexity in the world, people are caring quite a lot about this topic. It's a very hot topic, and I've been writing books for the last 10 years or so to try and help make what really is a set of a bunch of different ideas from a bunch of different places to make them useful, practical, helpful for very busy leaders.
And what can you tell us about cultivating leadership, the consultancy that you have created with your team members? I saw your website; you have many people working with you. I thought that you were a 2 or 3 team people group, but no, you are many.
Yeah, we're really big. We're about 80 people around the world, quite a global organization. We started this organization about 15 years ago, and I started it with 3 friends, and we never imagined we would be so big. But we started this organization based on exactly the same principles as the principles we teach about and the same practices we use. And that has made much to, kind of much to my delight and sort of to my surprise, it has made a really gorgeous organization that people love, founded on these principles from complexity theory and adult development, and based fundamentally in friendship and in our desire to make the world a better place. So we could talk a lot about cultivating leadership. I find it super interesting. One of the things to know is that the 4 of us who own it, just gave it away. We just created a foundation and gave the organization to the foundation. So all profits now get spent on goodness, particularly around climate change and equity globally.
Wow!
So.
And this book, Unleash Your Complexity Genius, what was the things that told you that you had to write this book, and what are you covering in particular?
So the book right before this is called Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps. And this book is about the ways our body and our habits are not very well suited for handling complexity. And then COVID came and people were so exhausted. And so this book, the Mind Traps book, got very popular but people were really exhausted, and helping them understand one more thing about the way their body is not suited for complexity seemed tiring. And so I started to get really curious about the opposite question. How is it that we are super well suited for complexity? And how can we ramp that up? Because I thought it must be true that humans are great at complexity, right? We've been dealing with complexity and we've been flourishing as a human race with complexity for millennia. So I figured we have to be great at this also, as well as find it difficult. And so this book is a companion book to the Mind Traps book. And whereas Mind Traps looks at what's hard, Complexity Genius looks at what's easy. And so I think the two of them together are really matched set.
Okay. Personally, I find complexity accelerating, except when you put a deadline on it. So
Yes.
you have, solved this problem, and my mind could go in all kind of different directions. What about if I try this? And what about if I try this other thing? And why this doesn't work? And why this thing? But then if you tell me solve this problem by 4 o'clock today, and then as you mentioned in the book, and then the babysitter calls and says you have to pick up your kid because something is happening, and then the car breaks down. So now complexity goes haywire, and I just don't know how to deal with it. So my mind can handle complex problem without deadline, but once you put that deadline things and all the other factors that were not anticipated, then everything goes to the garbage can. How can we deal with that?
I mean, you are pointing to exactly the paradox this book addresses. And the paradox is we have so many resources as humans for handling complexity well. We have such a wealth of possibilities at being great at handling complexity, and all of those possibilities close down as soon as things get like very stressful. And the core paradox is that for most people, complexity itself is very stressful, right? It creates stress in the body. And so then we have this crazy thing where we're great at handling complexity unless our lives are complex, and then we're terrible at it, which is not a great combination.
Okay, so how do I deal with my problem? I have to turn in this work at 4 o'clock today, and
Yeah.
the school is calling me, and I have to pick up my kid. What do I do? How do I deal with this complexity in my life?
What do you do? So the first thing you do is notice that the automatic things that your body is going to tell you under these circumstances are probably not that helpful.
Mm.
So the first thing for us to know is that when we are feeling calm and cruisy, our automatic ways of dealing with complexity are probably good. But when we are feeling stressed out, our automatic reflexes are not our friends. And so we have to figure out, how do we return our bodies to a state that is more conducive to handling complexity well? And just knowing that is important, because then you know, oh, I have to do something to get back to this place that is better. And one of the things we talk about a lot in the book is this question of, is it my sympathetic nervous system that's activated, the sympathetic nervous system that's about going fast, doing things, fight or flight, racing, which is great for a lot of things, but not particularly good for complexity? Or is it my parasympathetic nervous system that's active, which is more about connection, creativity, problem solving in a more open-minded way, right? This is really what we need. And so when you feel yourself activated, as you're talking about, the phone rings, you're on a deadline, you have to go, then you figure, how do I get my body back into this other state? And there are things we talk about in the book that are kind of short term that you can do immediately. So the first thing to do is notice, right? Like, this is the first thing. Oh, this is happening to me. It's huge. It's amazing that humans can notice and then change their states. That's amazing. And then to breathe, because our breath is the actual switch between these nervous systems. And so we can breathe our way through, and then to begin to create in our lives some ways to engage our genius. We call them gems, these genius engagement moves. There are all kinds of moves we can make to, on purpose, turn on our parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay, and what do you think of compare making segments for different facets of our life? For example, I'm a follower of Steve Jobs. I love his creativity and all the things that he created. And of course, we all know Steve Jobs among many things because he always wore the same turtleneck sweater and the same jeans. And he said that he did that because he doesn't want to think about what he's going to wear the next day. He just wants his mind to be able to deal with the complexities of his day-to-day job and the things that he doesn't have to take a decision. Well, then he doesn't have to deal with that. So I guess making different compartments in our mind will help us deal with complexity.
I agree. I think this is a brilliant strategy. Obama did the same thing, right? If you can reduce the exhaustion of choice anywhere in your life, it's very useful to do that. It's very useful.
And okay, and I think of professions like firefighters or policemen who train, or people in the army who train the same drills over and over. So whenever they find themselves in front of a complex, stressful situation, they don't even have to think about it. Their body just reacts in the way that they have been trained. And I think you mentioned that in one of your videos. There are, I guess, a formula that you already have, like cooking baking a cake, and then you already know the procedures of what. And I guess that's one way to make our life less complex.
So when there are formula to use, when you can follow a recipe, this is great. Take the complexity out, follow the recipe. This is fantastic. Tomorrow night, I'm cooking dinner for 22 people. Following a recipe is very helpful. It will reduce the stress in the kitchen before I have this big dinner party. But for things for which there isn't a recipe, if we try to use a recipe that makes us more stressful, you point to police. Well, uh, there are often times when police are faced with a situation that they've never seen before and that they don't quite know what to do with. If they follow the recipe that says shoot the person running, right? Like suddenly you've got disaster, right? Like suddenly you've got this is not an appropriate recipe. And so in those cases, we actually need to be trained out of our habits, right? We need to be trained into a whole new set of things. And those things are take a breath, notice what's going on, check your assumptions, check your prejudices, like all of these things can happen very fast, but they are very necessary.
Wow. And to go against our instincts is so difficult. I tell you one thing, I am an investor in the stock market. Okay. And then COVID arrived. And of course, oh, it's the end of the world. Many of my friends told me, some of them with high degrees, chartered financial analysts, MBAs, and this. Many of them say, oh, you had to sell because the level of uncertainty, we have never seen this before in our life. It's better to be safe. But like I'm 55 years old, I have seen cycles before, and I say no, the thing to do is to buy in cases, even if I don't understand what's going on, even if the war is falling apart, even if there's blood in the streets, as Rothschild used to say, the thing is to buy in cases of uncertainty. So needless to say, I did good in this scene, but many of my friends, they natural instinct was to sell because it's just crazy. I mean, people are actually dying. We see it on TV every day, in Italy, in France, in China, whatever. So the best thing, of course, is to sell and put whatever there is in safe environment.
Yeah, you are talking about the human desire to feel safe. And our bodies don't understand whether we're facing a mortal threat that threatens our lives, or whether we're facing a threat that threatens our money or our sense of worth or our identity, something that's really important to me as a person. I'm facing embarrassment, right? To our nervous system, these are all the same threat. And if we let our nervous system choose, we will always choose this fight or flight, activation, do something right now direction, which tends to be quite self-protective. In complexity, the self-protective idea is not that useful, because in complexity, we need connections, we need innovation, we need to be thinking in all kinds of open ways. As you were thinking, like, what are the larger patterns we're seeing here? What are the larger patterns we've seen before? What kind of experiments can we try? All of these things are important in complexity. But if we listen to our nervous system, the nervous system says, get out, run as fast as you can, protect yourself, forget the others, right? Like these are the messages our activated nervous system sends to us.
And would you say that there are people who unintentionally walk into uncertainty and insecurities in their life, while other people intuitively try to stay away from it and just set as much certainty, uncertainty as they are able to handle at any particular moment?
Certainly, there are folks. I've been teaching leaders about uncertainty and complexity for the last 20 years or so, and certainly there are people who fall on a spectrum. Some people are more comfortable with it, and some people are less comfortable with it naturally, I think. But everybody can get better at handling it. I'm convinced of this, and I'm also convinced that even the people who are naturally good at it run into situations where they're terrible. They're terrible at it, because uh, it means that their threat responses may be less common to be triggered. But as soon as you trigger a threat response, unless you have practices, it's very hard to stay away from these activities that are self-protective.
Okay, so I wonder if you could give our listeners one or two additional tips on how to deal with the complexity and uncertainties of our life.
So one of the big pieces of good news is that the way we handle complexity well is to do activities that actually are fantastic. So there are questions about taking care of our body. This is important, of course, but there are also questions about taking care of our emotional life, right? How often do you laugh? Right? How often do you let yourself be in a state of curiosity as opposed to a state of knowing or certainty? And then what are the techniques that you might have? We suggest a bunch of techniques, but everybody has their own, right? What are the techniques you have for actually creating the conditions for you to be laughing more often, curious more often, in a state of awe more often? It's our Carolyn Coughlin and I who wrote this book. It's our sense that many people kind of expect these things like laughter will happen sometimes, but they don't actually arrange their lives to make them more common. And if we know that they're good for us, like exercise happens sometimes, but most people have to arrange their lives to make exercise more common, right? For most of us. And we do that because we know exercise really matters. It's the same with laughter. It's the same with curiosity. It's the same with love, right? How do we arrange our lives to make these good things more common so that they happen to us more often, so that we have more access to that part of ourselves that thrives under these conditions?
Wow, I love that message. I am part owner of a dance school. We teach salsa and Argentine tango. And I love seeing how people come from their jobs all stressed. I can see they still have the spreadsheet in their eyes and then because I don't know, because they made a mistake dancing, or someone said something silly, they explode with laughter. And if they put that in their calendar once a week or something, I see their life improving almost within a matter of 15 minutes of being in a dance floor. And this, I mean, I don't teach people to do professional dancing. I just teach people how to have fun in a dance floor. And I can see that creating the condition in which people can have laughter improves their life dramatically. Can you give us one more tip in order to deal with complexity?
Yeah, so I think this is a great tip. I love this. So I would also say you're talking about creating people to have laughter. I wonder how people think about how do we create the conditions to have love, right? How do I create the conditions to admire people around me more, to listen harder to others so that I can really see them and feel connected to them, to be a little bit more vulnerable or open with them so that they can really see me and feel connected to me. Like, what if I thought this was part of my practice, right? Part of my healthy routine was to create more connections around me. It's just like your brilliant dance school example. Is it doesn't take very long for us to change the conditions of our lives and make great things possible. And the message of this book is that when we do that, we also get much better at handling complexity. We solve problems more creatively. We are easier on our bodies. We're easier on one another. I think we'll be easier on the planet, and our lives will feel more joyful. That's a pretty
And
good combination.
when you talk about seeking love, are you talking about romantic love or just
No,
friendship all around loving each other?
everything,
Okay.
everything. Like, you can love your pet, love your house plant, right? Love your colleagues at work. I think that we have a piece of what our challenge is we have these very anemic ideas about love, very single-minded and small. This is a huge concept, and it's probably the thing humans are most have most developed to do, most grown able to do. Let's do more of that.
Is there any kind of activity or habit that you suggest in order to find more love in our life?
The first thing is to look for it, to seek out and admire those around you. So lots of us have a kind of critical eye, and we spend our time thinking, oh, I wish he wouldn't do that, or it makes me crazy when he does that. If we begin to talk to people, ask them questions about themselves, the deeper questions about what matters most to them, about what they're most passionate about, all of a sudden people who are very annoying and bothersome, we open up to them and we feel something different. And this is just, you can do this in an Uber, right? Like, you can do this with your Uber driver. You can do this. This is not about coming on to anybody. It's not in any way sexual. It's not, this is about, can we find more places where we can connect more deeply with other humans?
Okay, well, I'm going to try some of that too.
I can't
Jennifer,
wait to hear.
can you tell us one more time the title of the book and also about your organization, or where can people contact you if they want to reach out or see what you are doing?
So this new book is called Unleash Your Complexity Genius, and it's published by Stanford University Press. And if you want to get in touch with us, we are at cultivatingleadership.com, and we would be delighted. You can also find me on LinkedIn and Twitter and all those other places. We'd be delighted to hear how other people are, I love your dance school, how other people are finding ways to change the conditions of their lives.
Jennifer, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.